Waltzing Among the Willows by Aurora Schlosswald. Chapter 5. Wanted for Public Indecency. Eleanor averted her eyes when she saw the female stagecoach guard, for the other woman's hands, elbows, and ankles were clearly visible. Furthermore, she was traveling in the company of two men. What must her husband be thinking? "Howdy," she greeted. "How do you do?" Eleanor responded. The male guard frowned. "Are you meeting someone out here, ma'am? Ain't too many ladies on their own among the Willows." His companion chuckled. "I don't mean nothing by it," he explained. "I was just funning." "I'm afraid I don't understand the joke," Eleanor admitted. "Well, this here town is called Willows, and being among the Willows means you're running from the law." Years of experience had taught her how to smile and laugh at the truth. Although she was indeed among the Willows, neither the guards nor the driver knew as much, but if she bristled, she would earn their suspicion. "I'm Nate. This here's my best friend Tex." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Is it a common name for a woman?" The guards explained how once when the cattle drivers had been in town, the drovers had been demonstrating their skills to each other in the corral. When they noticed that passers-by had stopped to watch, one man had seized the opportunity to address the crowd. "Howdy, folks," he grinned. "We was wondering if y'all could help us by judging. See, me and this other feller both call ourselves Tex. If you don't mind watching us for a short spell, you can tell us who you think done better, and that feller'll be Tex, and t'other'll get hisself another name." "And what did you figure on doing when a woman bested both of you?" the female stagecoach guard demanded. His grin instantly faded. "Well, now, are you sure you want to try? Roping and riding and shooting ain't easy. You might get hurt." "I ain't worried none. I had the pain of bringing forth new life more than once." The man who had addressed the crowd stood in the saddle of his horse. He urged the horse into a run and swung his rope, managing to place the loop around the neck of the nearest steer. His challenger, the other man called Tex, rode two horses side by side, placing one foot on each of their backs. When there was enough distance, he allowed a third horse to run between the pair, passing just below his knees. The guard nodded her approval and turned to Nate. "Can I use your neckerchief?" He handed it to her, and she approached a horse. Looking around a final time, she tied the cloth around her eyes. "That there horse ain't wearing a saddle," one of the men cautioned. "What makes you think it needs one?" she replied evenly. In a blur of graceful motion, she swung herself onto the horse's back and urged it into a run. She then managed to leap to the ground for only a moment before returning to her perch on the animal's back. But this time she stood upright rather than seating herself. Now she turned in a complete circle as if twirling for a waltz. "How's she doing that in a dress?" a spectator wondered aloud. "Too easy," she dismounted. "I prefer uncorking a bronc." Nate grinned as he untied the neckerchief. Any man with half a brain would be proud to have such a beautiful, spirited woman as his wife. "Did you want to shoot?" she queried. "I can hit a bottle on that there fence post with my gun upside down, squeezing the trigger with my little finger, with my eyes covered." After seeing her demonstrate her marksmanship, the men conceded defeat. "Guess you're Miss Tex," Nate commented. When they had concluded their tale, Eleanor was perplexed. "I don't mean to pry," she began, "but you said she has brought forth children, but she is not your wife." "I'm married to a drunk," Tex answered. "Nate's wife died giving birth years ago. Me and him are friends, and we help each other when we can, But don't fret yourself none. We ain't lovers. Is it customary out here for ladies to reveal their ankles, elbows, and hands? Most don't, but I've been a married woman for years, and my husband ain't never took no pleasure just seeing my arms and feet. Other men don't even notice 'em, and why's the blame always on women? It's good to dress modest so you ain't torturing a man, and you're showing respect to your own self, but how you dress ain't no excuse for what a man does to you. It's his fault for not controlling himself. All the time I've been riding with Nate, I've been dressed like this, and he ain't never touched me. Eleanor felt her face grow hot with shame. Did all women out here freely discuss such inappropriate topics? Bodies were to be hidden in both appearance and description. There were even questions a proper lady would refuse to answer for her physician, as well as procedures she would never allow, even if her life were in danger. How does guarding a stagecoach work? She asked. Do the same guards remain with the coach for the entire journey, or are there different guards for each part? Tex shrugged. Reckon it depends on the company that hires 'em. Me and Nate don't usually go too far out. We ride the stage to wherever, and then we ride it back home afore the young'uns get out of school. Ain't too often we're gone longer than that. For the next 2 hours, Eleanor watched an endless sea of tall grass wave in the wind. When a small patch of the sorriest collection of buildings she had ever seen came into view, she was confused. Were these the remains of a town that was now uninhabited? Why did the stage pass through this desolate place? To her astonishment, she noticed that there were people entering and exiting the buildings. A wave of horror overcame her as she realized this town must be prairie grass, where she had chosen to hide until she could plan her next step. How long would she have to conceal herself in a town that was barely more than unkempt wilderness? The stage came to a stop in front of the hotel, and she managed a polite smile as Nate helped her descend. A porter exited the hotel and asked if she needed a room. At her nod, he began gathering her luggage. Eleanor immediately noticed that the lobby was rather plain. The only furniture was a small table and 2 chairs in front of the stone fireplace, which held nothing on its mantel. However, she needed a place to stay, so she paid for a room. For a moment she questioned the wisdom of having checked in using her real name, but she firmly believed she was at very little risk of anyone in this town discovering her past deeds, so why bother concealing her identity? If anyone did find out, she could simply leave. As Eleanor stared at the bare white walls and wooden floor, lined only with a threadbare rug that was a shade between dingy green and light brown, she felt her flesh crawling. How long would she have to remain in such crude accommodations? The mirror on the wall was smaller than her face, and its frame was crudely carved wood. Now that she had a moment to think, she needed to form a plan. By now, Scotland Yard had no doubt contacted the Pinkertons. If she showed her face in any major city for the next several weeks, someone was sure to find her. Perhaps she should hide for at least a few months. One of her tutors, Algernon, had once told her of a man who had fled from the law by hiding in Bushmills, but when he was discovered in Belfast a year later, he had been returned to London, where he was sent to Australia after his trial. Algernon's piercing eyes had frequently been bloodshot, but Eleanor had always suspected he was tired or ill rather than intoxicated, for he never smelled of liquor. Despite his white hair and wrinkled skin, he was an imposing figure, made more intimidating by his taciturn nature, and age had not slowed his reflexes or hindered his agility. Eleanor had been badly frightened of him the first time they met, and it had taken over a year for her to learn to trust him. He also had seemed annoyed by the idea of teaching a young child, but his fear of lions was so great that he dared not disobey. However, the two had gradually formed a truce that eventually became a form of friendship, and he looked after her as if she were his granddaughter. No explanation was ever given for his death. He was found sleeping beside a dish of food. Lyons always claimed the old man must have perished of sudden heart failure, but Eleanor had always wondered if he had been poisoned. Many perceived enemies of Lyons often died under mysterious circumstances. Her suspicions grew when she discovered some years later that Algernon had been the rightful owner of the mansion. Lyons had murdered his entire family, sparing his life only under the condition that he work as a servant. Algernon had firmly refused the offer at first, stating that he would sooner be in the hereafter with his family than submit to their killer, but he had soon reasoned that the finest way to avenge their deaths was to survive long enough to see Lyons brought to justice. However, he must do so without drawing attention to himself, for despite his belief in a peaceful afterlife, Algernon knew all too well that any method of execution used by Lyons was highly unlikely to be quick or painless. He lived in fear of his employer, but he still left anonymous tips for the police and prayed every night for justice. If Algernon had indeed been poisoned, what had been his final offense? What had he done to anger his employer so terribly? Had Lyons simply tired of the game and ended the torment? Or had he discovered that Algernon had been giving the law information? To this day, Eleanor could hardly bear thinking of her former tutor. She had so many happy memories of Algernon that there were some days when she missed him just as much as the day she had found his lifeless body. When she heard certain songs or stories that reminded her of him, she was barely able to conceal her emotions. Had Lyons felt that way about Garrison, being able to pass his former friend in the street, but knowing they would never again be close? Had Garrison felt these pangs each time he read in the paper that Lyons had committed another crime, knowing how likely the felon was to hang when the law finally managed to apprehend him? Although Lyons had always treated her kindly, Eleanor had seen him lose his temper with far too many people for her to trust him fully, for she had always feared she may one day become the recipient of his wrath. She had once seen him beat a man to death with his bare hands. When she had become skilled enough to be his accomplice, almost all the men she had murdered were rival criminals or disobedient subordinates who had enraged Lyons. Now she was beginning to wish that Lyons had been her first and only victim. He had indeed given her many happy years of lavish comfort, but now she had lost everything, and if she ventured out of the shadows, she may easily lose her very life. Why had she never realized there would one day be such a dreadful price for his favor? Why couldn't he have left her in peace when he found her as a young orphan? If she had been able to find a loving family to adopt her, she would be with them in her native city rather than alone in a ramshackle town in a foreign country. Pushing aside her memories, Eleanor began unpacking. Tomorrow she would begin the work of trying to carve a niche for herself, but she intended to spend the rest of her day writing in her diary and reading one of her novels. Meanwhile, 3 men were meeting in the saloon in Willows. There were various wooden tables and chairs, which complemented the hardwood floor. A piano rested in the corner near the stage. The wallpaper was not quite a geometric design, but neither was it a floral print, yet it was somewhere between the two. Buck raised his glass to his lips. After all these years, his heart was still more bitter than his drink. When he was a younger man, he had yearned to go to California and search for gold, and he had dreamed of the life he would have as soon as he had made his fortune. However, every time he had managed to save up enough money to venture forth, a terrible calamity had befallen him, and he had needed to use his savings for other causes. As the years passed, he heard fewer and fewer claims of miners meeting success, yet he still longed to try his luck. His brother Cecil preferred to spend his days hunting, for he loved the taste of fresh venison or wild duck. However, Cecil's job of repairing wagons kept him so busy that he rarely had time to hunt these days. Over the years, he had put on a little weight, for his wife prepared exquisite dishes for holidays and social gatherings. The third man, Claire, was no relation, but he led the outlaw gang of Willows. "And that's how we'll take the bank," he was explaining. "I don't like it none," Buck commented. "There ain't been trouble in Prairie Grass since Paul got snake bit. The sheriff's right proud of hisself for keeping folks safe. Ain't there no other banks? Would you rather go to a town where the law's expecting trouble and is on guard agin it, or would you rather have an easy job and be halfway to whatever the blasted place is called? Prairie grass ain't too far from here, protested Cecil. Me and Buck been living here for years. Folks round these parts know us. Marshall locks us up a few times each year when we done drunk too much, and me and Buck sing real loud till we fall asleep. Ain't it better in a town where we don't know no one? Don't matter none, Claire responded. We'll be out of here after we get the money. The other men nodded. What about my woman? Cecil demanded. You'll send for her when you get a better life elsewhere, or she'll ride out with you, Claire shrugged. Don't got no use for women myself. Met one in Indian Territory and pretended we was married, but I left her when she told me she was wearing the bustle wrong. Even we're robbing banks in towns where folks know us, why not this one? Why do we gotta go to Prairie Grass? They got more money from them there cattle drives, and their sheriff ain't as tough as our marshal. Ain't as smart, neither. Buck hoped the conversation wouldn't continue too much longer. He was eager to return home and resume his favorite hobby of building toy wagons for the local children, although he frequently stopped halfway through each project, becoming too preoccupied with other matters to finish. When he returned weeks later, he would often find that he had misplaced many of the tools or pieces he needed to continue building. For this reason, no carpenter or undertaker had ever hired him as an assistant, for how could he be trusted to finish a house or build a coffin in time? His parents had hoped he would become a priest, but although Buck held certain beliefs, he refused to participate in any form of organized religion, for there were too many hypocrites in any given church. He hadn't attended a sermon since the day someone had accused him of being the devil. Looking back, he realized that perhaps he shouldn't have tried sneaking the bottle of wine intended for communion out the back door of the church with the intention of becoming intoxicated.